Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to GovernorLive. This is the first of 10 sessions that we're running between the months of March and July, covering a wide range of topics. And we're starting off tonight with Michelle Gray, who's from a law firm, Berg, who are based in Manchester, and she's going to be doing an employment law update. There's going to be plenty of space for Q&A, and we'll maybe explore just some of that in the housekeeping in a moment. My name's Ian Usher, and I look after the Modern Governor service. So if you've got any queries about Modern Governor, I'm your person to talk to. But yeah, we're going to focus really on the employment law stuff tonight. And let's just do some housekeeping so we understand where we are. I think about half the people in the room haven't been to one of these sessions before. So if you have, you're welcome to sip on your drink. We do encourage people to bring a drink of their choice. Yeah, let's just explain how things work. So very importantly, we can't hear you and we can't see you either. And it may be the case that our video might pause like this. If for any reason it does, don't worry, we're still here. If for some reason your connection goes, there are a couple of people on mobile devices. If for some reason the app crashes or your connection goes or someone pulls a cable out, once things are sorted, just come back in and we will still be here. And as has been mentioned, we are recording. If someone in your family is doing a lot of something on the internet at the moment, maybe they're watching Netflix, they're mainlining something on Netflix, or they're playing, Call of Duty's a bit retro, but they're playing some sort of online game, you might ask them to maybe step away from that for an hour. This is like turning all the taps on in your house. If you try and run a tap and everyone else is running a tap, it runs a bit slow. And it's similar with the broadband in your own home. So maybe gently encourage them if you're able to do that. We are recording, and so that means a whole sorts of things, but it mainly means that you'll be able to see this if you have to step away or have to leave early, or someone joins late, they will be able to catch up on this later on. Now, this is kind of pretty much everybody here has some role in governance, and we do ask SLT if they want to come as well. Modern Governor is open to anybody who's an assistant head or a deputy head as well. So we're happy for anybody to attend. But we do going to conduct ourselves as we would in a governing body meeting, which means several things. It means basically being respectful, and also just as you would hope governing body meetings would go. If you've got a question, the best thing to do, if it's a comment, it might be a comment with a question mark, but if it's a question you would like Michelle to answer, please just preface it with a Q. I will go through and collate all those together. So when we come to Q&A, we will have all the questions and we won't have to go scrolling up to find them all. So if you can preface it with a Q, that will be really helpful. And we will answer questions, Michelle mainly will answer the questions in the presentations after this. Please do bear in mind issues of confidentiality, particularly if you've got a very specific question. I would encourage you to think about how you might phrase this if you were talking about someone, maybe at the school gates. How would you talk about this in a suitably abstract way? Because it may be possible to work out what's what. You'll see that your surnames have been removed in the chat transcript, and that's because it's easy for anybody to go on Edubase or go to Google or other search engines to find out where you might be a governor if they were watching the recording. The recording will be public, and so we do ask you to bear that in mind when you're asking your questions. Tonight's presenter is Michelle Gray. If you've been attending the Considerations for the Conversion series that we did in the autumn term, which you can watch the recordings of, you'll have seen Michelle advising about issues about conversion and the legal aspects of that. She's an education partner at Berg, and she's also the head of employment law at that firm in Manchester as well. And she's also vice chair of an LGB in a multi-academy trust. Her email address is there, and I think she'll probably give that out again later. So maybe there are questions that she can't answer fully, and it might be that you want to follow them up with her later on. Okay. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Michelle. I will stop my camera, and I'll be working behind the scenes to collate your questions. And I might nudge Michelle if there's a question that's maybe pertinent to answer halfway through. I might speak over her. I'll try not to. Okay. So we'll hand over to Michelle. I'll stop the camera, and we'll come back for Q&A when she's done her presentation, and we will have a long time for questions and answers. So don't worry, your question will almost certainly get answered.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Ian, for that introduction. As Ian said, I'm the head of employment at Berg Solicitors. We're based in Manchester. I'm also the education partner there, and we support schools on all sorts of issues, including HR issues, which are obviously key in schools. What I want to go through today are really a combination of updates in the world of HR and employment law. I'd also address the national funding formula. I'll touch on some change management issues, and then there's some interesting cases that I want to go through with you. But before all of that, I think it's important to go back to the basics of what governors' responsibilities are when it comes to staff. The approach in the slides this evening are going to be very high level. Most of you have either, I imagine, been in business or currently are working in business, and therefore you're not getting involved in the actual doing in the school, but you need to have the information in order to ask the right questions at your meetings, but also to have that strategic oversight. So the session this evening is pitched at a high level. I am happy to go into more detail, for example, on change management, performance issues, and perhaps if Ian can fix another session for that if there's a demand for it. I was chairing a school business management conference today, and certainly the theme of from that session was around performance management. And it really ties in with the current landscape of where we are and the budget cuts, etc. So we'll get on to that. But I wanted to touch on the basics. For those that are perhaps new to governance in schools, I thought it might be helpful to just go through a couple of the basic issues. So in terms of who the employer is, it depends on the school, and I've set out some examples there. For community and voluntary school, it's the local authority. If you are a voluntary aided or foundation, then it's the governing body, and academies, it's the academy trust who is the employer. Faith schools, it depends on the faith, but it may be the diocese. So in other words, depending on the nature of the school, the employer is going to be different. But it's important to understand that, because the mechanics of any decision making, obviously it may have to go through the local authority. There'll be certain policies and frameworks that you need to be aware of. In terms of your responsibilities, hopefully all of you have at least received a copy of the Competency Framework for Governance, which came out earlier this year. I am doing a session on this later on in due course. I think it's a key area for governors to be up to speed on. They need to understand what their responsibilities are. The government and indeed Ofsted are becoming increasingly tighter on good governance in schools. So do tune into that session. But I've highlighted or an extract from one of the core functions in the framework, which is holding the head teacher to account for the educational performance of the school and pupils. And in bold, I've emphasised the performance management of staff. Now, whilst your governing body meetings will not go into the detail of staffing matters by perhaps name, having an overview of whether there are performance management issues and how they're being dealt with is something that governors should be asking to ensure that the proper policies and procedures are being followed, that they're set. You may want to look at reviewing them and monitoring their effectiveness. So as part of that, going back to that strategic oversight, your role from that point of view is to make sure that the head and the various senior leaders, people responsible for staffing matters, are following the framework for performance management. So in terms of your responsibilities and involvement, this could range from appointment, if you've had your safer recruitment training. It may involve dismissal of staff. Usually, I don't know, maybe some of you have got involved in appeals. Setting standards and procedures, so the policies that I mentioned, and addressing any grievances and capability matters. Now, obviously, some of those issues can be delegated to the staff and so on. But depending on the school and the varying degree, if you're part of a multi-academy trust, depends on the scheme of delegation. But you ought to be looking at your policies in relation to staffing matters and ensuring that they are up to date and obviously comply with current employment law. So just moving on then, I want to just canter through the apprenticeship levy. We've been talking about it for some time, and hopefully if it does apply in the school that you're in, then you will be up to speed with it. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but it's coming in April this year. It's effectively a tax. It applies to any employer with a payroll of 3 million. So for schools, you will need some support from the obviously from a financial perspective, but actually, do you understand how you're going to get access to that funding by way of the training that it offers? And what I put there is a link which gives some more information on how you can access and actually take some benefit, because the levy is towards the training costs of apprenticeships. It's not towards wages to pay for apprentices. I think some people have been concerned about or confused about what it actually is for, but it's a tax for paying for training for apprenticeships. I can't really not mention the new national funding formula. It's obviously very high on the agenda. The consultation is still ongoing, and that will finish, I think, on the 22nd of March. So it is important that everybody does give their view on what they think of it. There are winners and losers. I don't know whether you have looked at your local area. Certainly around here in Manchester, there will be losers. But we'll have to obviously see what the government decide to do in relation to the national funding. It is thought, there's been a study on it by the Fiscal Studies, that spending per pupil is going to, or is likely to fall by 6.5%. So the reason I'm mentioning it, obviously it's topical, but it, in my view, is going to have an impact on staff, because if your budget is cut, then you have to look at your costs, and some are fixed costs, but the most expensive cost in a school is obviously labour, and I think on average it's about 80% of the cost. So it's a large proportion of the school's spending, but it's probably the main area that can be changed and to some degree is flexible. So it's a case of looking strategically at where your school is in relation to the national funding formula, and it's a good exercise to do it anyway, in terms of ensuring that you're running effectively and efficiently. And you will have there's varying degrees of organisational change policies that cover circumstances where there are budget deficits. There needs to be a restructure. From your governor's post, you'll obviously not be involved in the day-to-day dealings of that, but you should be asking questions about the impact on the school, how the budget will change potential staffing costs, and whether there is scope for change, and bearing in mind that there has to be, as probably some of you may have dealt with in your own day jobs, there is a process to be followed, which some employers do still get wrong, but you should also be ensuring that your policies are followed and that unions are involved if appropriate. I've put a link on the slide there, which is the change curve, which I'm sure some of you will have come across, and there are various forms of the change curve, where particularly where an organisation has to go through some significant restructures. But now is the time that you need to be looking at it, because if the new funding formula comes in, it's going to be coming in next year, and any changes you need to be thinking about, and you need to be tabling those and discussing those at your governor meetings. Okay, so on to the next piece of new legislation that's coming in April this year, is the gender pay gap reporting regulations. Now, some of you may have come across more widely the notion of the gender pay gap in the private sector regulations, which were published before Christmas, and it's only been this year that the draft regulations, and they are still in draft, subject to Parliament's approval. But it's only been this year that the draft regulations have come out for the public sector. And I've been talking to a number of schools about this, and there's still a lack of awareness around the fact that A, they're coming in, and B, why perhaps schools in education need to make reports on their gender pay gap, particularly given the national terms for teachers. But I've set some statistics out there on the slide. Now, the figures in brackets actually apply to the education sector. So overall, all employees, the gender pay gap is 18.3%. For full-time employees, the gap is 11.3%, and then in the education sector, it's 12.4%. But when you get to part-time employees, you see that the gap widens to 22.7%. That's the national figure. But in the education sector, it's 34.6%. And that probably accounts for perhaps the number of females working part-time. Certainly that is the evidence that sits behind that statistic. And there are various causes of the gender pay gap. We've been talking about the gender pay gap for many years, and certainly David Cameron made a statement that he was going to reduce the gap in a generation. Obviously, he isn't in post, but clearly Theresa May has progressed with the concept of compelling organisations to publish their reporting obligations when it comes to the gender pay gap. There's a lot of detail in the regulations, and obviously I can only touch on it. I did a webinar on this a few days ago, so I will see if I can perhaps link that into this session that you can watch, and that's about half an hour session. I should say that the regulations in both the private and the public sector are pretty much mirror each other. There are some subtle differences with the public sector reporting, which I'll touch on, but in the main, they are the same for public and private. So what do the regulations require you to do? What do they say? So they're coming in the 1st of April 2017, and they apply to organisations that have 250 or more employees. Now, there's a list at the back of the regulations, which I'm not suggesting that you read, but there is a section in relation to education, and it includes governing bodies of maintained schools, local authorities, obviously in relation to pupil referral units, city technical colleges, and academies. So it effectively covers maintained academies, colleges, and it also includes further education and higher education. So it's quite far-reaching. And in relation to public authorities publishing their gender pay gap, somebody asked me the other day, why do we need to publish our gender pay gap? We all have the same pay, but clearly the statistics that were on the previous slide demonstrate that actually there is a gap and it needs addressing. So the government want to make this as far-reaching as possible. The regulations do cover definitions. One of the definitions is what's known as a snapshot date, and that is the date on which an employer should capture the data on which they are later going to report on, and I'll come to the reporting requirements in a moment. But the snapshot date for the public sector is the 31st of March. For the private sector, it's the 5th of April, so that's the slight difference and change there. It applies to, in terms of the counting of 250 employees, it applies to full pay employees. So in other words, people who are in work in receipt of full pay. It does exclude people on sick leave, maternity leave, paternity. So in other words, people who are not on their ordinary full pay. Again, there is a definition for what ordinary pay is made up of, and it includes basic pay, allowances, piecework, leave and shift premium, which I think the latter probably wouldn't apply in an education setting. Ordinary pay excludes overtime, redundancy or termination of employment and holiday in lieu of accrued holiday in lieu of leaving. So in terms of pay, you can see that it excludes quite a bit of pay. You're mainly looking at basic pay and any supplements on top of that. I should say that the regulations expressly exclude any overtime in terms of what is made up of ordinary pay. So what are you actually reporting on? Well, the government have set out 6 reporting requirements. And again, I will emphasise it's not possible to go through this in any detail, so I am dealing with it at a very high level, and I'm not going into the detail, but I will try and link the webinar that I did from the other day so you can have a look at it in more detail if you wish. But the 6 reporting requirements require reporting on the rate of average pay as a mean and median between males and females, the average pay expressed as a mean and median of bonus between male and females, the proportion of males and females paid a bonus, and the proportion of male and female employees in 4 quartile bands. Now, I did say the regulations apply to both the private and public sector, and they pretty much mirror the same. The question that I think most people are asking me about the applicability to schools is, where does the bonus fit in? And as I said, these are the regulations. They apply to organisations in various forms. Now, it may be that you can simply make a report that no bonus was paid. But again, it's a requirement to, if there's data there to capture on that particular reporting requirement, that you capture that data. So just touching briefly on what you need to do with the data. So within 12 months of capturing that data, so within 12 months of the snapshot date, so we're talking the 30th of March 2018, you need to publish the information on a website, so the school's website, and the government are going to designate a specific website for your reporting to be made. That website hasn't been made available yet. I should say with this information, and it is a significant part, but it's not mandatory, is a voluntary narrative that would accompany the reporting requirements. And that voluntary information is really an opportunity for organisations to explain why there are gaps. It may be there's a particular reason for it. One explanation could be perhaps that with TUPE, so perhaps if you've converted to an academy or you've joined an academy, there are differences in pay for that reason, bearing in mind that academies are free to set their own terms and conditions. There is also a curious decision made by the government not to fine an organisation for failing to make the report. So currently there's no penalties for failing to comply. However, there are indirect penalties, because if the information isn't made available on the website, then there will be questions asked. And the government has said they are potentially going to obviously review that enforcement position. So just finally, I mentioned the webinar earlier, and I will try and get a link to that. If not, at the end of this session, I'll follow it up, and Ian can send it over to you. So it was a bit of a counter to the gender pay gap, but I do have to press on, because there's quite a lot of case law that I want to get through, which I think as governors you need to be at least aware of, and it may be that you've dealt with these in your day-to-day positions. The first case is a case called Scottish Canals and Smith. It's a recent case of really a line of cases dealing with social media dismissals, and it's an important one for schools, particularly given the use of social media across the various platforms and the type of comments that can be made. But when we're talking about an employment setting, some individuals still, which I find surprising, still think that if they post something on Facebook, it's completely private. If their settings aren't correct, then a potential defamatory comment could fall into the hands of the employer, and this is really what happened in this case. The facts aren't particularly unique. The point I wanted to highlight from this case is that if employees are making comments outside of school, but about other staff or about the school, action can still be taken. And I think that's really the message to take away. I'm just conscious of time, and I do want to get to talking about the other cases. I'll come back to the disability discrimination case, because I've got another slide on that. The third case, A and B and another, there's a link there. We prepared an article on this for Schools Week when the case came out. It was effectively a head teacher who was dismissed for gross misconduct after the school found, the governing body found that she formed a relationship with somebody outside of the school who was convicted for a number of sexual offences. And the key in this case was the fact that the head had failed to disclose that relationship to the governing body. And as a result, the governing body's responsibility for safeguarding was put at risk and hampered because they weren't given the information. It subsequently came out that actually this particular head was involved in the relationship. And so they found out eventually, but the fact that the head did not inform the governing body, and they were therefore not able to take a view and make a risk assessment. It does bring up issues about perhaps matters that would be regarded as private matters becoming part of and subject to the school's knowledge. And I think particularly given you've got a head involved in a senior post and they weren't able to carry out their proper function on the safeguarding, all added and contributed to this individual's dismissal. I've briefly mentioned at the bottom there about holiday school fines. We know that we're waiting still for the decision of the of Mr. Platt's case in the Supreme Court as to whether this particular child who had, I think, about 92% attendance, whether there'll be any decision made against him for taking his child out. That would then mean that there'd be a reversal of the High Court decision that was made. So I did want to just, I suppose, final thoughts from me. I appreciate I've cantered through quite a lot there. Is really the landscape is one of austerity when you're looking at the budgeting and the potential next couple of academic years and the constraints that are going to be made. That is going to have an inevitable impact on staff, and your governing body meetings do need to put it on the agenda as to what the future holds for your particular school. That completes the session. I've seen there's a lot of questions which hopefully we can get through.
Here we go. So I have put the questions down here. I don't know, Michelle, if you just want to start working through them from the top. We can't really tick them off, but we can. You can answer. There's a question over there on the left that I'll be interested to see the answers to. But Michelle, maybe if you start with, Paul's got something that's slightly kind of beyond the scope of what you talked about. What are the implications of the new IR 35 regulations for schools?
Yeah. So in terms of, self-employed workers are a topic generally. If you watched any of the budget yesterday, there's been an increase in national insurance for self-employed. There's a lot of case law around this particular issue. I think the implications for schools are making sure that you have an arrangement in place that properly sets out in a contract what the relationship is and the nature of that relationship. I don't know whether some of you may have been following the Uber decisions around self-employment status and worker rights, and it's about making sure that the school isn't put at risk if they are using a sort of form of consultancy arrangement, and obviously the tax implications that could arise out of that.
And then Liz, I think, was as much of a comment as anything else, saying that I think she'd had a conversation with a local authority. Let me scroll up and find it. A local authority person saying that the apprenticeship levy doesn't apply to a VA school because of, obviously, it's a slightly different nature of it not being maintained. In some respect.
Yeah, there was quite a lot. I think there's been some confusion about the apprenticeship levy with schools and which schools it applies to, which schools it doesn't, and the guidance actually wasn't very clear, and I think that's caused some confusion around it. I actually, at the conference today, overheard someone talking about that very same issue, that they were told one thing and then something else.
Okay. And then Bethan asking really about kind of, I guess this is to do with employment issues, can staff governors be involved in those discussions around staff issues during meetings, or might they have to declare an interest, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've got to be very careful that you're not discussing them in too much detail, because you then may be sitting on one of the panel that then has to perhaps deliberate on a capability hearing. So I personally always I insist that we sort of talk on an anonymous basis if there are issues, and it's on a very general basis. I think, as governors, you need to know what the general themes are. So if you've got staff who are off sick, how many are off sick, for how long? I think the issue on sickness absence, I could give a whole hour on that. It's quite a complicated area for schools because of the way the pay is set up and the risks involved. But you can take proactive steps. You can take action. But you're entitled to be asking those questions of just general themes of who is absent.
There were a lot of questions about the gender pay gap. So we'll start with Liz's. Sorry. I think it probably does. I don't know. As Liz, Bethan will probably come back to us if it doesn't. In terms of gender pay gap, there was lots of questions as you were going through that. So Liz's one, kind of sort of the flip side of Ashley's one. As a maintained school, will the council request additional information from our SBM, School Business Manager, if you're not familiar with the acronym?
Yeah. It shouldn't do, because it depends on what information they've got. I'm assuming that that question there hasn't been much intervention yet from the local authority, and it may be they've got the information they need. I think the regulations came out quite late on, and in fact some employers are still trying to get to grips with how they're going to capture the data because they don't have the right software systems. But it's certainly worth discussing it with your local authority to see what steps they're taking, whether they say that it applies, because you've still got to go through the test of whether it applies, bearing in mind the regulations cover the reporting requirements of governors of maintained schools. So it's worth speaking to your local authority to check that you're both on the same page.
And then Ashley's asking, it doesn't apply to a foundation school, Ashley, which is kind of...
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't, but I will... I'll have a look at that. It talks about, when you look at the definitions of what it covers, it's maintained, governing bodies have maintained schools, local authorities for pupil referral units. But it does give very wide definitions. So I will check that. It's worth checking that point, but I will check it as well.
I've just copied it from the document that I think this is the right one. I may get this wrong, but I think this is taken from, I've got a link to it in the box. I think this is what it says.
This is Schedule 2, Yeah, so Schedule 2 has a list of all public authorities. So it has the police, the BBC are on there, and then it has a section on education. So that is the list of education establishments, they call them, that apply. Yeah, so the governing body of an educational establishment. Maintained by a local authority.
But then, of course, it's clarified, isn't it? Within the meaning of Section 1. So you then have to go and find Section 162 and just double check that you don't have an opt-out or that you've included in that wide net. Paul asks about the gender pay gap reporting kind of threshold, if you like, of 250 employees. Is that employees or posts?
Yes, it's employees, so it's the head count.
Okay. Not sort of equivalent of full-time equivalent. And Kyle asking about, in terms of publishing, this may be, of course, a moot point if they're not actually, if it's a target with no teeth, as they say. Does publishing the information, does it have to be on the MAT website, or is it on the individual school's website, if I guess they have their individual schools' websites within that particular MAT?
Yeah, it would be the Multi-Academy Trust, because that's the employer. So it applies to that particular employing entity.
And that probably comes on to Sharma's question, which is saying if a school is part of a MAT, the employer, assuming that the scheme of delegation means that the MAT is the employer and it's not down to that would be... But actually it would be a count across all of the staff. So any MAT of any size is going to be liable for this.
Yeah, I mean, it really is going to, if you look at the current landscape with some of the size of MATs, they're obviously going to exceed that threshold.
Yeah, and if you're looking at 4...
I mean, bearing in mind, I was just going to refer back to some of the sessions we did last year, and some of you may recall, if you watch those, we dealt with the legal structure of a MAT, the legal entity of a MAT, and the legal entity is the trust. So the individual schools have no legal status. So you have a master funding agreement, and then each school has a supplemental funding agreement because there may be differences. One may have PFIs, there may be other funding issues there. They'll have different pupil admission numbers. So the master funding agreement is with the trust, the lease is with the trust. They effectively take ownership of that and are the legal entity.
Yeah, it's important for us. I think we kept coming back to in the considerations of the conversion sessions. It's important to realise that you don't exist as anything kind of distinct, even though you may have I think people get confused with the physical building, don't they? They think, well, it's a separate school, and it kind of its identity is subsumed into the MAT in whatever form that takes, isn't it? Okay. So we have got some more space for some more questions. If you've got any just general queries, or we may be done, who knows? If you've got any more questions, now's a good time to type them in while we've got a small lull. And I'll just hide that series of notes. If you scroll up, there are a series of links in the chat box. And when we write this up, as Michelle said, if she can get the webinar, the other webinar that she's done, and we will put that link, the recording link, into the blog post that writes this up, which will come out either tomorrow or Monday. And all of these links that I've sort of thrown into, as Michelle was talking, some cursory Googling while she was talking, I will make sure that they are all in the blog post that comes out as well. So it looks like, I don't know, it looks like nobody's got any more questions. Maybe everything's sorted, I don't know. But Michelle's email address is there.
Well, yeah.
In the text box. It's also on one of the first slides. So I'm sure, subject to her being very busy and maybe taking not, a couple of hours, but maybe a few days to reply, she'd be happy for you to email her as a result of this if you've got any more particular queries. Michelle, can I just ask, in terms of HR, as a kind of, I'm a vice chair in a maintained school, but we are a VA school, so we kind of are the employer. It's one of those kind of, it's that kind of twilight zone between being an academy and being a fully maintained school. What sort of, from a law firm, and clearly you're from a commercial company and that sort of thing, what sort of things do you do for schools that they can't do themselves? Because those of us who are in maintained schools and haven't had to engage with a firm such as yours or any other, local solicitors or whatever, what sort of things do maybe me as a maintained school governor think, well, I could probably do that, and actually you might actually counsel us to say, you need to hand this over to somebody else. What are the sort of areas that maybe people think we can do, and it turns out that we may struggle with?
Yeah. Well, the areas are numerous. We get involved in all sorts of things. I think it's about looking at what your skill set is, because some governors will have a skill set, and what bearing in mind that governors have a voluntary job, and there are therefore limitations to that. But it's about ensuring that whatever service you're getting value for money. Certainly the schools that we work with that come away from the local authority, they're used to that service, but in fact it does open up a new world when they come to a sort of professional services, if you look at accountants or law firms, because we work with partners, we have support for governors for training, for staff training, and we put on free seminars, as well as dealing with some of the difficult matters that schools have to deal with. So it's a different service, and we're probably regarded, certainly I've had feedback that we're more commercial than I should say some local authorities or perhaps other similar organisations who provide services perhaps under a service level agreement. So our advice is to ensure that you're getting good value for money, you're making work supporting you on making commercial decisions and minimising risk.
And we often hear, I often hear from people like the NGA and kind of all, good practice in governance, the idea of governors not doing, as I say, pro bono work, kind of, so you have a lawyer on your governing board or your trust board, and therefore you kind of farm off the work onto them. As in, will you do this for us on the cheap? And what are the risks around that? Is there any limit? Is it like, don't touch that? Or is it something that's a bit like, you could do it, but you need to have a kind of limitation around that? Those of us who are fortunate.
Yeah, I think it's, if you've got, if in your day job you're used to carrying out tasks yourself, and it's hard to take that hat off and put a governor's hat on and think, well, actually, there are people in the school that are being paid to do the job. And you can't, it's just not practical for governors to start delivering or giving advice or attending meetings. And you're conflicting your role, which is a very strategic role, to perhaps one of the executives who would need to take responsibility for it. So I think the risks are, the danger is you end up giving up more of your time on a matter that the teachers or SLT or head should be dealing with.
I think my question is almost around, sorry to go over this, but my question is around, say there is someone in your governing body, your trust board, whatever, who says, well, I look after HR at my company. I do that kind of stuff. In terms of them kind of taking on a role that in another school where you didn't have that person, you would normally go to a law firm for HR and employment advice. What are the risks around that? Or is it like, yeah, it's okay as long as you're careful? Because from my mind, I don't have a clear understanding of that, and maybe other people don't too.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're saying that a governor provides a particular service which the school could take a benefit of, and that governor is then paid for that,
but if they're not,
then there are clear conflicts of interest.
If they say I'll do it for free or for cheap or for nothing, is that a kind of a? Yeah. I don't know.
I think there would be potential question marks. I think there's potential risks if Ofsted were to investigate a particular matter. And if you look at, take for example, HR, if you get involved in that to an extent where you know too much and then you're expected to deal with a disciplinary or an appeal, you would have to be completely eliminated from it. So there's a clear conflict in getting involved in the type of delivery that the executive team should be doing.
Because it is interesting to hear Lord Nash talk about that we need, lawyers and accountants and people, and there's almost a feel, isn't there, even though it's the idea you're there for your skills and your professionalism and your ability to ask good questions, there is kind of an undercurrent of, but you could help out with a bit of kind of legalese on the side, as it were. So, sorry, that was just my particular question. Just dominated the end.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I think it's a worry. I think it's a worry for people who are looking at either becoming trustees in multi-academies or academies, or governors just in other schools. I think that they're concerned they may have to give up too much, that they're asked or compromised in a situation, perhaps forced by the head to take on a particular task. But certainly my experience is that schools do tend to know the limitations, and I think it's up to that particular governor to say, well, that's not my responsibility. You wouldn't be doing your job effectively if you did do the work.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. Okay, well, we'll go back to this, and we're just going to look at... Thank you, Michelle. That was really helpful, and I think there are lots of positive comments in the things there. Just to say what we've got coming up. So this is obviously March the 9th, and this is our employment law one. The next session is in 2 weeks' time, on March the 23rd. Karen Ray, who, if you've joined us for the considerations for conversion sessions, will be doing something on budgeting basics for governors, and that's the first of a series of 4 sessions that she'll be doing until late April on really the kind of the financial and accounting side of things. And I'd say if you're in a maintained school, I mean, I'm in a maintained school, so we somehow don't have to deal with a lot of this, although we have to kind of touch on it, not as much as we might do in the academy. Even if you're in a maintained school, you've got colleagues who are, it's a really helpful thing to look at because it gives you an understanding about what the enhanced and extended responsibilities are if you were to become a trustee in a multi-academy trust or a single academy trust or whatever. So I really recommend that. Just the précis of what Karen's going to be looking at. It's going to be on budgeting basics for governors. It's going to be a very entry-level sort of thing. Might help you do budgeting in other aspects of your life as well, but it's very much focused on helping governors prepare a budget. And like today, there's going to be about half presentation and half questions. And so I don't think you can bring along a load of figures and kind of put them in front of Karen and say, can you fix this for me? But you might, bring examples of how maybe your school has addressed and struggled with budgets. And you might be able to kind of give a vague, maybe a generic sort of response to that. So do register. If you've been to the moderngovernor.com/2017 live page where all of the events are listed, including the one you're attending now, then you'll be able to register for that as well. If you've already registered for this and you're in the room, then you have, and then you'll be able to use the same username and password just to kind of sign up for as many of those as you want to. You'll get the usual automated emails and you'll get the follow-up emails afterwards. So yeah, you can have a quick look at there. Karen's not here tonight. We're not bringing everybody in for all the sessions, but she will be in for the budgeting basics one. And thank thank you very much for taking part this evening. We're going to make the recording freely available. If you've registered, you should get an email probably late tomorrow afternoon, just with a link to it and a thank you for attending. And then we will probably tweet out on Facebook and do the usual about sharing the link to the YouTube channel. And they're all going to be on GovernorLive on the blog there. You're welcome to share this with anybody. These are for SLT. They're for... the thing I have about SLT at the moment is the senior leaders in your schools, the deputy and assistant heads, if they end up progressing to become head teachers or principals or heads of school or whatever, they're going to be involved in governance. So if they want a better understanding of the sort of issues that governors have to deal with, please do invite them along. They are more than welcome to come. I've put various links in terms of the change management thing that Michelle mentioned. If you're a Modern Government subscriber, there are 4 modules on change management in there that you can work through, and all of your governing body can work through to help you understand how change management works. And we'll put all those links together that we've done, and we'll have those in, all sorted and in the blog post as soon as possible. So Michelle has just put her email address in the chat box, and you're more than welcome to email her. Obviously, she has a day job. We're all kind of doing this in a voluntary capacity, so as everybody does in our governance roles as well. So you may be slightly patient in getting a response, which is probably a sign that it's being taken seriously as well. So what I'm going to do is just switch to doing a quick evaluation. It'd be really helpful for us if you can just let us know how you found this and if we can improve it in any way. If you've been before, you'll recognise that we've done this on a number of occasions. So please just go through these questions. It should take more than 30 seconds, maybe. If you've got nothing to add in terms of what went well and what could have been improved, then that'll be even quicker for you. But yeah, it'd be also interesting as well, that kind of bottom left question. There are some topics already scheduled. You'll have seen the finance ones. There's one on safeguarding. There's some on doing a SWOT analysis about preparing for academisation. They run until July. But in the meantime, if beyond that you like anything, then you can let us know, and we'll see what we can do about putting them on. But in the meantime, I'm going to stop the recording now. We'll stay in the room for a little bit, but I'm going to stop the recording now. I'll then work on the recording later, and it should be available tomorrow evening. So thanks ever so much for attending. Again, thanks for the time you spend doing all your other governance stuff, and this is just another hour to kind of add on to that big great big pile, isn't it? But thanks ever so much for attending, and I hope it was useful. Contact Michelle if you've got any queries, and hopefully see you in a couple of weeks. Do tell your colleagues about this. Again, all these sessions are completely free, and they're designed to help us become better at what we do, and kind of fill in those gaps we might feel we have, or just give us some practical ideas. So thanks ever so much, and we'll see you again soon.